G'day there, you're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today on the channel we'll be looking at using pyRevit to copy elements between documents, so sort of like a selective transfer project standards if you've used that tool in Revit before. So we'll be using Autodesk Revit 2022 and Notepad++ as our, not really IDE, but effectively where we're writing our script. We're using pyRevit and also IronPython as our programming dialect. So if you haven't already seen some of my earlier content in Python or pyRevit, this may be important to watch first. I'm not really going to explain some of the fundamental Python concepts related to this video. Hopefully you're sort of familiar with pyRevit and Python already. It's more focusing on a new technique in pyRevit and Python. So I'll firstly just quickly breeze over how I've set up the basis for the tool, so the bundle configuration, how it appears on the toolbar, but we'll really dive straight in typically to actually the crux of the workflow, which is going to be collecting, in this case, view templates and sorting them by their name, displaying them to a user in a list, and also then taking those elements and copying them from one document to another. So it's a really useful little workflow, especially if you're dealing with lots of different models that need elements to be the same or transferred on a regular basis. I hope you find it quite useful. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in. As always, if I'm talking a little bit too fast, feel free to change the playback speed. No hard feelings. Anyway, let's jump in. So today we're going to be solving a pretty common problem that especially model managers and BIM managers may face, and that is when transferring project standards between models, you have to transfer everything effectively, rather than very specific things. And some things are very difficult to copy, such as, not just copying and pasting between models, but you sometimes can't even select the objects to copy them. For example, view templates. So let's say, for example, in this model here, I have a whole set of view templates available, and I want to move across a couple of the plan or section-based view templates. Well, I'll make a new project, and I'm just going to use a none template, so it has pretty much almost nothing in it. In this case, we would obviously have no view templates because the none template has none. And I would usually go manage, transfer project standards, check none, make sure I'm focusing on the project I want to transfer from, and I would find view templates. Now that is sort of useful sometimes. In this case, we can see what's happened here is it's brought across all the view templates. So you could always just go here and delete, and start deleting them all manually. But it's quite an annoying process to have to repeat and to do, especially if you really just want one thing. It could be a lot of templates you're dumping in, and they might be mixed up amongst the other templates already in this model. So it's not really feasible to work that way. So today we're going to focus on picking from a list of templates from that model. So I'm going to be working in this case in my target model, and I'm going to have the model I'm transferring from open in the background behind it. So I've already set up a toolbar from previous videos, and I've just added a new tool to this called Transfer Templates. Currently, this tool is just empty. There's nothing associated to it. The configuration for this, just for a reminder, is we have panel.extension, which is our panel. We then have our ABG tab. We then have a panel test, and then we have buttons, push buttons in this case. So I've made one called Transfer Templates, and I've also added, in this case, that Transfer Templates to this bundle so that it appears on the end. Then what I have in here is firstly the icon, which in this case is a 96 by 96 pixel icon. I also have a bundle, which is telling this object what its name, tooltip, author, and context are. So in this case, the context is doc project, so it has to be run from within a project document. So you could also make it for family documents, for example. But in this case, this has to be run from within a project document. Other than that, we're pretty much just dealing with the script file, which is currently empty. So we're going to begin writing this tool and then just progressively start testing and running it at various intervals. So in this case, I'm in a Python file. So if you are using Python in Notepad++, usually you're going to want to go to language and go to Python. Or you can also name your script file with a .py for Python, and it will open it in the Python dialect instead. So in this case, we're going to begin, like many of our scripts, by importing some libraries. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can read this. And we're going to be importing from pyRevit. We're going to be importing usually the same suspects we're typically working with, so script, Revit, DB, and forms. And we're also going to be, in this case, accessing the list object because we're going to be using the list object later in the script. So I'm going to say from system .collections .generic import list in this case with a capital L. So at this point, we should find that our script will do nothing. It's just importing some objects. So for now, it's quite simple. Now, usually what we do next in most of my tools is get the current Revit document, which we will. So we're going to get the current document, and we can use the Revit library from pyRevit for this. I'm going to call this document document2 in this case. Usually I just call it doc. Today it's going to be a bit different because we're going from a document to a document. So I want it to be clearer which documents we're talking about. So in this case, I'm going to go revit.doc to ask for the active document. I now need to actually select another document open in the background. So if I go to the pyRevit documents, there's a little video I'm watching there, some music. So in this case, we have the forms library, and from this, we're going to ask for the select open docs form, which will tell us all the documents open in the background and allow us to pick one or multiple. In this case, we are just going to check more than one is equal to false or multiple. And in this case, what I'll do is just select background document. I might just move me over just a little bit. And in this case, I'm going to say, and I'll just make sure I'm not blocking myself with my camera. Yep, not too bad. So in this case, I'll say document from is going to be equal to the result of using the select open docs form. So to this, we're going to provide some arguments. I'm going to say title equals select a document, of course. For the button name, I'm going to override it to the word select. I might just zoom out just a little bit. And then I'm going to say the width in this case is 500. I usually find that's quite a good width. And in this case, we want to say that multiple is equal to false. We only want to be able to select one document. So from this point, we should be able to now trigger a user interface. So we can see now this is our background document available to the user. We can see any number of documents in here, including family documents, I believe. So in this case, we now need to check, first of all, did we get a document? And also, is it a project? Because if it's not a project, we're not, in this case, going to be able to transfer or copy view templates from it. So this is effectively where our script currently ends. So now we want to actually just make sure the choice is suitable. So I'm firstly just going to say if not document from, which means if there was nothing specified for this option, then in this case we do want to exit the script. We just want to stop running this workflow at this point. I can also say elif, so else if. We also want to check if our document is a family document. There's a property in the Revit API which is called isFamilyDocument, which we can use to the document class or request of the document class to find out if it's a document that is a family. In this case, if it is, it's going to return true and satisfy the criteria for this elif condition. Otherwise, it's going to go to else, which we won't specify, and that means that it just continues. So in this case, if it's a family document, we will also exit. Now we might want to tell the user why we stopped running the script at that point, because they won't understand. They're like, I've picked a document, why didn't it keep going? Well, in this case, we can use a simple alert from the forms library, and we can just tell the user must choose a non-family document. And then we can just say the title is going to be script cancelled. And let's test these two conditions. So maybe we might also just create a dialog if the user does. Oh no, we'll leave it there. If they exit it, they exit it. That makes sense. So let's also open a family document. I'll just make a generic family in this case, just a column of some sort. And we'll go back to our document, run our transfer templates tool. We can see now we have a family and also a project. So let's just pick nothing for now. So we can see in this case, our tool has exited the script. Now let's pick our family document. It's a family document, the trigger is met, and now we can see we have to choose a non-family document. And then we can also just pick our correct document instead. Oops. Teams is open there. Sorry, I need to pick the other one. There we go. And we can see at that point, our script would now continue. So let's close this family document because we've tested this. We know it works. So now at this point, we should have our document. And for those that have seen a few other videos on this channel, you know that we often use filtered element collectors, and we're going to get all the view templates in the model. In this case, the model is actually going to be our background document, but luckily you can do filtered element collectors in linked or background open documents as well. So we're going to get all views from doc_from. So in this case, I'm just going to say views is equal to, and we're going to use db to tell pyRevit that we're using the Revit API and we're using a class from this Revit API. So filtered element collector, and we're going to apply this to doc_from. And in this case, we're going to use the of category argument, and we're going to say db.built-in category. You could probably also specify it by view class, I believe, but we'll just use the OST views class there. We're going to want to make sure that the element is not an element type. So we're going to use the where element is not element type. And finally, we're going to tell these elements to be elements. So we should now have all the views in the document in the background. And we can just quickly test this, make sure I didn't make any typos. Yes, it looks like I did. Filtered element collector has no attribute of, yes, I've made a typo. So we'll just go and fix that with a T. And I believe at that point we should now have a script that should just proceed at this point, because in the background it's got the views. There we go. So now that we have these views, we need to find out which of them are view templates, because people that have worked with views before will know that there's other types of objects that fall under the view class, such as view sheets and view templates. So in this case, we're actually going to take a few little shortcuts. First of all, we're going to get these view templates, but we're going to get it in an unsorted format. It's going to be sorted by the order that the elements were created in the document, by their element ID. So I'm going to make a new object calling it LEs or elements unsorted. And I'm going to use what's called list comprehension here to basically do a one-liner to iterate over all the objects in views and check if they're view templates. And if they are, I want to include them in this list. So I'm going to say that this is going to be view for the in views. So I'm iterating across views, and I'm saying if view is template. So that's a property of view elements. And in this case, we'll just be left with the objects that satisfy that it is a view template in that object, which in this case will be our view templates. I'm now going to sort these. So there's a lot of ways to sort objects in Python. You could use zip sorting. There's a statement called zip that can do it. My preference is typically to use the sorted function in this case. So the way the sorted function works, as we can see, you have to provide an iterable or a list. You also have to provide a key in this case, which we're going to use with a lambda statement to imply a function onto that object before it's used as sorting. And then you can also optionally say whether you want to reverse, but by default you can see reverse is false. So what I'm going to do here is provide my elements unsorted. And I'm also going to say that key is equal to, and in this case I'm going to say lambda, which implies that we're running a simple function over an object. So we're going to say lambda x, and then we're going to say x.name. So before we use this as a sorting key, we're going to basically use this little function to ask the object for its name. So in this case, x being the object we're iterating through. So lambda functions or statements are definitely worth learning more about. They're very useful. They can save you a lot of space in your code and avoid a lot of unnecessary iteration. So just to test what's happened here, let's just say for e in LEs unsorted, print e.name. Whoops. And let's do the same for in unsorted, or in sorted, sorry. And we'll hopefully see that we've effectively fixed our ordering of the alphabet, the alphabetical sequencing of those names. So let's just put a blank line between them, and we'll see the difference that's happened there. So if I take this document, so we can see originally these were unsorted views. Now, for the most part, they were mostly in the right order, but you can see the architectural plan falls after ESD. They're not quite in a logical order. Whereas in this case, we can see they start with 3D view and then they work their way through alphabetically, so numbers come before that. So we can see we've successfully put them in a good order for a user interface. So we're now going to pass these to a user interface as a result. So what we're going to do now is create a, in this case, select from list form. So if we go to the pyRevit docs and look for select from list, I believe we should find the class. Here we go. So we can see in this case, we have to provide options, whether we want to select multiple. I'm just going to find the actual select from list object. There we go. So we can see in this case context, so the objects, the title of the UI, the width, the height, and various keyword arguments. In this case, these can be things such as whether you want to select multiple, so multi-select, and other various options as well. I'm going to use a custom class so that what we see in the user interface isn't necessarily what we pass behind the user interface. So we've used this technique on the channel before. It's sort of like using keys and values if you've ever used data shapes for Dynamo. But effectively, we're going to use a custom class to modify how an object reports its name, in this case, whilst passing itself through in the background. So what I'll do in this case is just display user interface. And I'm firstly just going to actually define my custom class. So I'm going to make a class, and I'm just going to call this elements to copy. So it's a special object we're passing through, and it's going to be of the nature of forms template list item. I believe that this is probably on the forms page as well. It's probably explained. There we go. So we can see that this class wraps an object passed to context in template list item. So we're effectively taking this object that the select from list interface uses and just modifying how it displays itself as it passes through the user interface, I believe, in this case. Because at the moment, if we just take the object as it stands, I believe it will show its ID and its raw representation. We'll do a test just to have a look at that. But in this case, to this class, I'm just going to set one of its properties, which will be, in this case, its name. So we're going to define name self. So to the object that is of this class, we're just going to return, in this case, self item dot name. So we're going to show its name as its name property, noting it's a different case, so it isn't the same property as its typical name. And now we're actually going to show our options to the user. But for now, I'm just going to work without this custom class. So I'm just going to say elements to be copied, or element to be copied, is equal to forms.select from list. And in this case, let's just for now say LE's sorted. So we're not using our custom class. And I'll say title equals to select elements. And then I'll say, in this case, width again, I'll use 500 just for consistency. I'll say button name, which is an optional argument, is equal to copy. You could say transfer if you want to. And we'll also say multi-select equals to true. I believe that's probably all we need in this user interface. So for now, let's see what we get when we run that as our user interface. So I'll transfer template, pick my background document, and of course I have an error. In it takes exactly 5 keyword arguments, line 30, probably my user interface. So in this case, I'll just double check I've got the right number of keyword arguments. I have to show this particular type of UI, because you can prepare these in the background before you show them, I believe. So I think, and there we go. So see how this isn't really a human readable representation of a view template. This is how pyRevit displays the name of the object. This isn't really obviously something a human can read easily. So what we're going to do is back out of this UI, and we're going to use our custom class instead. So I'm going to say, in this case, options copy is equal to, and I'm going to again use a one-line statement using list comprehension. And I'm just going to convert, in this case, my object. So I'm just going to say, in this case, element to copy, and I'm going to take my element of BT, or I'll just say E for E in elements sorted. And now instead of using elements sorted, we're going to use these options copy, and we should hopefully see a more human readable version of that object, but we'll still pass the same object in the background. There we go. So now we can see we have the actual name of the object, much easier to understand. It's a pretty common technique I use in pyRevit quite often, just to provide a better name to the object as it passes through the list. So I'm just going to cancel at this point. So now that we have these objects, we can effectively copy them. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to firstly just have to check that we actually did get objects before we proceed, because you might cancel the user interface at that point. So I'll just say make sure we have objects, and I'll just say if not elements to copy, we'll go script exit. Again, we probably don't need to show a message to the user. They've probably cancelled on purpose at that point. But now what we need to do is actually use a Revit API method here. So we're just going to go over to the Revit API and have a look at the copy elements method. Now this method's a little bit complicated. It deals with a few different concepts that I'll explain to some degree, but you may need to go further in depth if you want to learn about each specific thing here. So the first thing we're dealing with is the copy elements method, which is in this case going to be applied to the base class of the element transform utils or utilities class. And this will enable us to copy some elements from a source document to a destination document. We're going to be using a iCollection or a list of element IDs here. So I'll show you the technique we can use to generate that type of object for this particular method. We can't just use a standard Python list in that case. And we're also going to apply a transform in this case. This transform is just going to be a base transform. And we're also going to apply a copy-paste options object. Again, just a default copy-paste options object. These objects can be manipulated with various properties before you use them. So if we look at copy-paste options, in this case, there doesn't seem to be a great deal of things here, but we can construct them sometimes in interesting ways. This one seems fairly non-describable. It's just a base copy-paste options class. Transform, I believe, has more things we can do to it, such as setting the distance of transforms and various other properties as well. But we're just going to work with a transform, which is basically implying there is no change, it's just going from one place to another. So we're going to copy our elements, but first we need to create that list of element IDs, which is why I've imported the list class right at the start of the script. So first of all, we're going to get the element IDs of our objects as a Python list. So I'm going to say e.id for e in elements to copy. And now we're going to create the IDs to copy as a list. So in this case, I'm going to create a list object, and you'll have to specify the data type being held in the list, which in this case is going to be element IDs. And in this case, you can note I'm also putting it in square brackets, and I'm telling the element ID object it's a class by putting db in front of it, as per what you have to do in pyRevit. And then we're just going to, in curly brackets, just say IDs on the end, which will convert these IDs into a compatible list type, which we can use for our actual copy. I'm also just going to create a basic copy-paste options. In this case, I'm just going to create a copy-paste options object. And that's just going to create a basic copy-paste options thing to provide to the copy itself. And we'll just also have a basic transform. So I'll just do tfrm. And again, db transform. And I believe in this case, we also have to ask for its identity when we pass it to the copy-paste options method. So now we're ready to actually do the copy and paste with these objects. We're going to have to use a Revit transaction because we are modifying the model. So I'm going to say with revit.transactions, we're using the Revit library there. And we're going to give it a name. We'll just say copy elements. We're going to, in this case, create the element transform utils class and apply, in this case, the copy elements method that we've just seen. And we're going to take our document from, so where we're taking it from, we're going to take our IDs to copy. We're going to take it to our document 2, and we're going to, in this case, give our transform and also our copy-paste options. So we've created that method, which should copy these elements between the documents. We probably want to also just tell the user it's finished and what's happened. So we'll just say forms, and we'll make an alert. And we'll say in this case that the elements have been copied. So I might just make a message before this. And the message will be how many elements we've copied. So I'll say in this case, we're going to create a string, which is representing the length of the IDs list. And we'll say space elements copied. And that should be a good message to show the user. So we'll say message, and then title is equal to script completed. And in this case, we also want to say there is no warning icon because the script has successfully, hopefully, finished. So I believe, assuming I've made no typos, I think this should work. Fingers crossed that there's no typos, but let's try. So at the moment, this model should have no view templates in it. I'm going to go to my ABG tab, hit my button, pick my document. I'll pick just maybe 1, 2, 3 to copy. It's going to sometimes give some options when you're duplicating, depending on whether there are other objects shared by these. Usually you can say, okay, 3 elements copied, go to my view templates and check it out. We've selectively copied the view templates between the model. Now, the really great thing about this tool is you can copy lots of different things that are very hard to copy selectively using this method. For example, view types, wall types, ceiling types, floor types, all types of things. It's pretty cool how many things are able to work this way. Not everything can be copied in such a way, but usually if you can get that object with its ID to be added to a list like we did, most of the time you can copy those elements across. It's worth being aware that typically other things may come across with these depending on whether they have them. So for example, one of these had a view filter applied to it, so currently this one doesn't. But I think if I copy all of the objects across, we may find that some objects bring other things with them. So I'm just going to copy all of these, keeping in mind that we already had some of these here. So what happens when we already have them as well? Well, in this case, they get a 1 after their name. So you could also run a check before you actually send those elements to the UI and say, is there something that already has your name in the model? And maybe you might want to filter it out, or you might want to change its name to have something different in it, for example, underscore copy. But in this case, you can see it also does transfer sometimes objects across as well. But I'll find in this case, I've also noticed a filter came across with one of these view templates. So it does bring across a majority of other objects that may depend on, or objects that may depend on it. It's going to vary depending what you're copying. But otherwise, that's it. So I hope it's a useful technique, and I look forward to maybe hearing what other things people can successfully build using this fairly straightforward technique. So there we go. I hope that was a useful workflow. I've got all the files for this and other videos available on my GitHub. If you want to download the tools I've built today, they're all there, of course. So if you're not already following and subscribing, feel free to do so, or let other people know if you think they might find these pyRevit series in particular useful. I know there's not too much content out there on it beyond the Notion board. If you have any requests or topics or ideas, feel free to leave them down below, and I'll try to get to them at some point if they're relevant or I think they're suitable for the channel. You can also reach out to me at this email as well if you have any questions or queries. Excuse me. Anyway, thank you for watching today. I look forward to seeing you in future similar videos. Thanks. Take care. Bye.